Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is DreamFiction and today we will be reading the story Issei, the True Dragon of the Apocalypse, translated into English by Jyanzein.
A loud slap was heard in the Mount Lucifer's office, along with a fall. "That's what you deserve." Serziches looked at his sister lying on the floor with a certain coldness. "Do you know all the trouble you could have caused just for a chance to get into the rating games?" Rias just under her imposing gaze, rubbing her bruised cheek. "And as if that wasn't enough, you led to the death of a cadre who could have been on our side if we told him about all our plans. The opportunity to have such a spy and backup within the fallen angels was ruined by your irresponsibility and opportunism," he commented, without taking the cold look off his face. "Luckily, I had already planned ahead to arrange an armistice with the fallen." "An armistice?" Rias wondered, raising his gaze in astonishment after hearing her words. "That's right." Serziches finally abandoned his macabre gaze, looking toward the window. "The problem is that it is impossible for me to know how Azazel thinks. Only time will tell if he's on our side or not." "Wait, how did you convince Azazel to come to hell?" "To be more specific, he won't come just to visit hell." Serziches watched Ria's gaze, seeing that she was looking for an explanation. "You will know when the time comes. I do not intend to tell you, perhaps that way you will think better of your future actions." Serziches headed for the door, glancing sideways at his sister. "Regarding your little job. From the looks of it, we'll go ahead with the plan as planned. Tiamat doesn't seem to be amorously interested in Issei." Serziches opened the door, lifting his gaze with a small smile. "Still, I never expected that we would have the possibility of having Tiamat in our ranks. It's obvious she wants nothing to do with us, but if we can get Issei completely under control, she'll be on our side as well." Serziches fixed his gaze on Rias seriously. "We just have to be careful and not do anything stupid. If we are forced to make a drastic move, we must make sure we cover all the evidence so we don't have to deal with Tiamat." Serziches turned his back on his sister, giving a small sigh. At the very least, not having to deal with her until the end. After all, it doesn't matter if you're a human or a dragon king. We'll all end up with the same fate, he concluded, closing the door with great calmness. Rias just stared at the door for several seconds. Her hand still on her cheek that was getting redder and redder. The silence was finally broken when Rias hit the floor hard with his fist. "Why doesn't anything go the way I want it to?" shouted Rias in great anger. She knew she had achieved her goal of getting attention by defeating a cadre, but she never expected to be so humiliated by her older brother. Line jump. The sun's rays were beginning to peek over Kuo City. On this new day, everything seemed to be perfect, except for the wrecked academy that had already become national news. Other than that, everything said it was going to be a very nice day today, a completely quiet day with no chores. That was a very good thing, as a certain someone needed a full day to recover from such a battle. Now we turned our attention to that person's house, specifically. "Let's start another day with great energy." The alarm clock began to ring loudly in a rather adorable voice. "Come on, get up. If you don't get up, I'll crawl into your bed." Issei's hand cut off the alarm clock with a mind-blowing lack of energy. "How did I get here?" Issei scrunched his eyes deeply, trying to shake off sleep to no avail. "Good grief!" the young man exclaimed, giving a big yawn. "I've never felt so tired in my life," he said to himself, without even moving an inch from his bed. A small grimace appeared on Issei's face as he felt a small pinch in his abdomen, just as he felt extremely heavy bandages encircling his entire torso. Not even with the healing factors of Asia could they heal all the damage from that spear that pierced me, Issei thought, slowly lifting the sheets to take a closer look at his current condition. He got a big surprise when he discovered that the bandages weren't extremely heavy, as something else was putting a lot of pressure on his body. And that long, beautiful, unmistakable light blue hair spilling all over the bed was the proof Issei needed to find out who it was. "Tiamat?" Issei wondered aloud, watching as the dragoness slept peacefully on his chest. Their bodies seemed to be more intertwined than it appeared at first glance. Tiamat slowly opened her eyes, raising her gaze slightly after hearing her future lover's voice. "Good morning, Issei," the dragoness greeted, straddling the protagonist's waist. Although the sheet still covered her body and made the view look a little hindered, Issei was able to catch with great ease a detail that made him a little nervous. "Is she in her underwear?" he thought, seeing that Tiamat's two attributes were covered by a white bodice that left a large cleavage due to the size of her breasts. "Am I in my underwear?" Issei looked down at himself, seeing that he only had on boxer shorts at the moment, if we don't count the bandages that covered his entire torso. Are you okay? Tiamat tilted her head slightly after seeing that Issei remained completely static. Yeah, it's just that you surprised me. He replied quickly. Apparently, the fact that they were both in their underwear in the same bed only affected him for a second. Issei? A female voice was heard through the door, causing the boy to quickly grab Tiamat by the abdomen. Issei made a sudden movement to instantly hide the dragoness, drawing a small sweet whimper from her. Yes, Mom? Issei asked, hugging Tiamat's back to keep her from coming out. The dragoness blinked in slight amazement at Issei's reaction. Seeing that her hands could easily reach the sides of Issei's abdomen, a cheeky grin broke out on her face. There was a big incident at your academy yesterday. For today you will have no classes. His mother stated from the other side of the door. I just wanted to tell you not to do anything stupid while we're gone, because we'll be back very late today with your father. Did you hear? Why yes. A loud scream came out of Issei's mouth as he felt a strange stimulation in his body, and for that reason he moved in a strange way from the shock he received. Hearing her son's somewhat startled voice, Mrs. Hayadu raised an eyebrow. Hey, are you okay? Yes, I'm perfectly. The same thing happened again, though this time it was even more abrupt than the last. Mrs. Hayadu raised her eyebrow even higher, but finally bowed her shoulders, starting down the stairs. Hearing the footsteps move away, Issei quickly lifted the sheets and delivered an evil glare to Tiamat. What did you just do to me? A playful grin shot across Tiamat's face after the question. Do you really want to know? Yes. Issei looked doubtful. Tiamat grabbed the sides of his abdomen in one swift movement, then squeezed it a little. Ah! Issei cried out as he felt the tickling run through his body. Damn! He exclaimed with a big challenging grin on his face. Ah! No, wait. Tiamat exclaimed with laughter as she saw Issei start to play along, tickling different parts of her body. They began to tumble around on the bed, rolling over each other and sending the sheets flying through the air. Finally, the first round ended with Tiamat's victory when she managed to straddle Issei's waist. The position was somewhat odd, as Issei had ended up sitting on the bed against the wall, causing Tiamat's breasts to sink a bit into her face. Gotcha! Declared the dragoness with a triumphant smile on her face. Okay, you win. Issei stated quickly, lifting her face a little to look at the dragoness. Could you step back a bit? I'm having a hard time breathing. He pleaded, with a small blush on his face. A slutty smile decorated Tiamat's face. Should I? Issei widened her eyes beyond belief after what she heard. Oh, no. The smile on Tiamat's face grew even wider. No, please. Finally, Issei breathed a huge sigh of relief as Tiamat pulled his body away a bit, letting him breathe comfortably. You fell. Tiamat cried out in great joy, sinking Issei's face completely between her breasts. Gum. Issei tried to scream at her, but all his cries were completely muffled by the two giant mounts. Her face quickly turned violet, so she began to move her face frantically in search of a breath of air. Tiamat giggled, resting a hand on Issei's hair. You tickle me. Issei grabbed the dragoness's waist in one swift movement, causing Tiamat to blink in surprise and give a slight whimper as the situation turned against her. Issei made a quick move, throwing Tiamat on the bed and laying on top of her, winning the second round. Issei could be teasing Tiamat right now, but the position they ended up in simply wouldn't allow it. Tiamat's legs hugged Issei's hips tightly, bringing their most intimate parts into strong contact despite the underwear. Issei's hands ended up on the dragoness's back, while Tiamat's hands ended up encircling Issei's neck in a tender embrace that made their noses collide hard and their lips constantly brushing right now. Anyone in this situation would quickly pull away from each other and they wouldn't know how to look each other in the face. But they seemed to be very focused on their lips and their eyes at the moment. Their lips continued to brush against each other, neither making any move to separate for a few seconds. Even they themselves didn't know what they were thinking at the moment, they were just getting carried away. I forgot to tell you. Issei's mother's voice rang out loudly at the exit, completely breaking the moment, as Issei raised his face a little after hearing it. An exchange teacher from your academy is coming to live here tomorrow. I'm just asking you to behave and not make her uncomfortable, or you'll be punished. A teacher? Thought Issei, raising his face a little higher. Okay. Replied the young man quickly, only to hear the click of the door. A mischievous grin appeared on Tiamat's face. "My chance!" the dragoness shouted. "Woo-ah!" shouted Issei as he was thrown on the bed, flipping both of their positions once again. In the end, Tiamat took the win, finishing on top of Issei with a 2-1 scoreline. "You like winning, don't you?" Issei asked him, giving him a half-smile. "I love it," declared the dragoness with great conviction. "It was fun." Issei began stroking Tiamat's hair. "But you've already drained what little energy I had." Tiamat broke away from Issei slightly to grab a sheet and cover herself again. "Take advantage of this whole day to rest. Tomorrow will be a hectic day." A small flashback of Irina's death came back to her mind, causing her expression to twist to a much more serious one. "I know." Tiamat already knew him very well, so she picked up on his change in attitude right away. She acted quickly, hugging him very tightly and positioning her face on Issei's chest. "You'll have time to think about it tomorrow. Now, concentrate on getting well," she commented with great calm, causing Issei's gaze to visibly soften. "You're right." Issei brought a hand to Tiamat's cheek, causing a cute smile to appear on her face as she reaffirmed her embrace with great affection. The protagonist just watched this with slightly widened eyes, remembering one of his wishes before he became a demon. "You know." Tiamat raised her gaze, surprised by the warm smile that graced her future lover's face. "I always wished to sleep with a large number of naked women in the same bed to feel complete. Still, every time I imagined it, I felt that no matter how many naked women surrounded me, I always felt that in that desire something was missing. I felt empty." Issei fixed his gaze on Tiamat's eyes, making the dragoness feel the great gratitude her eyes gave off without the need for words in between. "But now, I'm with only one woman in bed. It's ironic." Issei laughed at last. Tiamat looked at him with great curiosity at his last word. "Why is it ironic?" "Because I'm only with one woman." Tiamat felt Issei's arm go around her waist, causing her to have a small shiver run through her body. "Only with one?" Issei brought his other hand to his heart. "And I feel fuller than ever." Tiamat couldn't help but clench the sheets tightly in her hands after Issei's words. His words had made her entire chest burn with a myriad of emotions. Even so, that enormous warmth didn't burn her, it simply embraced her as if she were a baby in her mother's hands. That burning sensation spread throughout her body until it finally reached her face and presented itself in the form of a huge blush. Simply put, she was completely moved by just his last 6 words. Simply put, she had felt her whole heart stir with great joy with just his last 6 words. "For that, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for making me feel so happy," Issei declared with a toothy smile on his face, unaware that his words were digging deep into Tiamat's heart. Issei couldn't help but blink in confusion as he felt Tiamat's hands move down his torso with a rather strange shyness on the dragoness's part. Finally, Tiamat slowly enclosed Issei in a big hug, lowering her gaze so that he couldn't see how her eyes shone with great love. "You can't imagine how happy you make me feel." For me, Tiamat's voice came out almost as a whisper, but the great tenderness she expressed in her words was felt with great intensity. "Really?" Issei did nothing but smile after hearing her dragoness's words. A big yawn proceeded after his words, indicating that he already wanted to rest. Anyway, not even 1,000 yawns could ever break what Tiamat was feeling right now. "We'd better get some sleep," Issei stated with a bit of seriousness, adjusting his embrace around his dragoness's waist. "Get some rest." Issei closed his eyes, not before smiling as he felt Tiamat's embrace strengthen even more as she rubbed her face rather tenderly on Issei's chest. She slowly began to close her eyes. "May you rest." Tiamat's so loving and affectionate voice came out with a big loving smile on her face when she heard Issei's heartbeat. "Line jump. Wake up, wake up." The voice with a dead tone was heard through the alarm clock. "If you don't, I'll kill you." Issei quickly turned off the alarm clock, then lifted his face from the pillow with clearly renewed energy. "Now I'm feeling much better," said the protagonist to himself, sketching a silly grin on his face. It didn't take Issei long to notice his dragoness's absence, causing him to raise an eyebrow. Was it a dream? He couldn't help but think, as he was too tired yesterday. "No, it can't be a dream. Those memories are too lucid," he said to himself, unable to do more than smile after remembering how Tiamat acted. Issei was quick to remove the bandages from his torso, seeing that he was already perfectly healed. He quickly changed into his uniform, ready to leave for Kuo Academy. My mother had said there was an incident, Issei thought, carrying his suitcase. What happened? Did what happened 2 days ago have anything to do with it? Issei couldn't help but wonder with great seriousness, opening the door to his room. The young man couldn't help but blink in huge surprise as he saw Tiamat was coming out of the front room wearing a black suit and a white shirt. Her attire appeared to be more of a man's than a woman's. But still, she looked very nice. Seeing Issei finally wake up, the dragoness fixed her gaze on him and slowly approached. The protagonist could only blush slightly when Tiamat intertwined her hand with Issei's, without removing that distinctive seriousness on her face that only made her look prettier. "How do I look?" the dragoness asked him, fixing her eyes on Issei's, indicating that the answer was very important. "You look great." The words came out of Issei's mouth without his consent, causing him to blush a little more. "Thanks." A small smile broke out on Tiamat's face as she took a step back to break away. "Wait a minute, why are you wearing a suit?" the protagonist asked curiously. "I've decided to attach myself more to the world of humans," she replied, picking up a white briefcase that was leaning against the side of the door. "That way we'll be together longer," she finished, handing a cute smile to her crush. Issei could do nothing but be surprised at such a statement. It really made him very happy that they both felt so comfortable with each other. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I already have to start my work," the dragoness stated, giving him a small pat on his head before leaving up the stairs. "Since when did that room have clothes in it?" Issei folded her arms and raised an eyebrow as she glanced at the locked room, until she finally bowed her shoulders. "Well, whatever." Line jump. The silence in the cemetery was absolute, despite being surrounded by the Kuo forest. Not a soul was in the place, except for a young woman with blue hair who was attentively looking at a grave without taking her eyes off it. The name of the person, who was now resting in peace, was engraved on the grave. Arena Shido. Zenovia positioned a hand on the grave, bending down a little. Her face remained strong throughout, but her eyes could not hide what she was feeling right now. The woman didn't even flinch when Issei stood beside her. He fixed his gaze on the grave of his childhood friend with the same expression as Zenovia. They both stood in silence for several seconds, not even sharing a glance. Finally a large breeze passed, causing Zenovia to stand up again. "I'm sorry it ended this way," Issei apologized, clenching his fists tightly. "If I hadn't been so incredulous, Now I finish understanding why Rena was so attached to you in the past." Zenovia interrupted him, causing the protagonist to fix his gaze on the exorcist. "Drake bearer no, Hayadu Issei." Zenovia rested a hand on his shoulder, giving him a small smile. "You're a very good person, and that didn't change even though you became a demon. I too would have liked it to end differently, but if it had, you might never have understood how you should act. Seeing your eyes, I realized that you now understand that not all people deserve to have a second chance. I only hope that you will continue to fight for what you believe is right and never doubt it again." Issei could only watch her in complete awe of her words until finally a somewhat sad smile came across his face as he took the woman's hand on his shoulder to shake it tightly with his own. "Thank you so much." Zenovia merely smiled at his thanks. "As an expression of gratitude, I would like you to take me to speak with your mistress, Rias Gremory," Zenovia stated, returning to her natural serious countenance. "I need to talk to her about the big lie I've been living in all these years." Issei's expression instantly grew serious as he realized he was talking about God. "Just now I had classes. If you want, I can take you to Kuo Academy to talk to her." Zenovia just nodded, showing her gratitude. Line jump. "Hey, some people say it was a terrorist attack, do you think it's true?" "I don't think so. Most likely some unruly student did it after watching a movie." "Are you listening to yourself?" "Most likely they just left the gas on and the whole thing went down. If it had been as you say, it wouldn't have been reduced to mere rubble." Issei could hear the rumblings of her classmates making their way to the academy. "What are they talking about?" Issei whispered in her ear, causing Zenovia to look at him with both eyebrows raised. "Don't you remember everything that happened well?" Issei just looked at her with even more curiosity, which was quickly dispelled when he felt a somewhat dense energy that made his skin crawl. Issei quickly fixed his gaze on the other side of the bridge, seeing how a rather recognizable white-haired fellow was leaning against the entrance gate with his hands in his pockets. The protagonist did nothing but sweat as Vali began to slowly approach his position. Finally, Vali positioned herself in front of Issei, fixing her gaze on him in a piercing manner. "At last we can see each other, Hayadu Issei." Vali narrowed his eyes with a menacing aura. Or should I say rival? The cold sweat on Issei's face only intensified after hearing the last words. Are you seriously planning to wage your battle now, White Dragon Emperor? Zenovia interjected, causing Vali to close her eyes with a smile. I was just coming to say hello. The albino turned his face back, drawing a completely serious expression. After all, it would be crazy to try anything with her around under his eyes. A huge aura as pure as ice could be seen emanating from the academy. Issei looked at him in confusion. She? Vali looked at him in slight surprise. That's right. You've barely awakened your power. It will take you quite some time before you can integrate the smell and aura of a dragon. Issei had a small flashback of when he sensed a powerful aura in the familiar realm, which ended up being Tiamat. You mean that? That's right, I haven't developed it again in a long time. Anyway, I just wanted to say hello and tell you that I'm looking forward to our fight very much. He stated, turning around to fix his gaze on Issei one last time. I hope you won't disappoint me. Issei could only watch him seriously, then swallow hard as he finally walked away. I'll have to try really hard, the protagonist thought seriously, raising his gaze to the sky. At that precise moment, he realized that something very strange was going on. Wait a minute, isn't something obstructing the view missing? The huge Kuo Academy building began to flicker in his mind, indicating to him that that was what was missing. Holy crap! He shouted with wide eyes, quickly running over to see that there was indeed a huge crater filled with rubble where the main building once stood. We were going to erase everyone's memory and fix the academy in one day, so this would go unnoticed. Rias joined Issei, giving him a small smile. But apparently, my brother has other plans. Although, don't ask me what they are, since he didn't comment to me about it. I see, and yet we still have classes? A bored look adorned Issei's face. Apparently it's the last class, before the summer vacation starts. Rias commented with a smile. Summer vacation? Wondered Issei aloud. Weren't they starting in 3 months? Yes, but they were brought forward. We'll have a month and a half vacation until they manage to rebuild the building. I see. Sorry for asking, but why are you here? Rias fixed her gaze on Zenovia with some seriousness. The problems have already been solved, so you have nothing to do in this place. I had to talk to you about something very important. Zenovia replied, causing Rias to stare at her for a few seconds. Let's go to my club. The Redeed stated, motioning with her head for Zenovia to follow her. But first Rias pulled a pamphlet out of her pocket, handing it to Issei. It's from your favorite client. The old man? Issei wondered aloud, looking at the pamphlet closely. Issei stood at the entrance, watching as numerous chairs were divided by groups in the courtyard. Most likely they indicated the different groups of students. The protagonist looked over to the side of the gate, seeing that there was a small notice indicating today's classes. Great, he thought with boredom. 3 hours of act for what happened, and then we have 2 hours of chemistry. Line jump. Issei's group was in their allotted grouping, taking seats on the various benches that were somewhat unstable due to the terrain. Fuck, that act was real hell. Mitsuda complained with great intensity. That's right, Motohama adjusted his glasses seriously. Still, I can't stop thinking about what happened. It's amazing that you have a thing on your mind other than a pair of breasts, Motohama. A brown-haired woman smiled teasingly at him while folding her arms. Aika Kiryu. Motohama folded his arms with a displeased look on his face. It's normal that I don't focus too much on women if in front of me I only have a board with some visual flaws. Motohama adjusted his glasses with a smirk, returning the insult. Does that mean you consider yourselves big men? Aika adjusted her glasses, observing Mitsuda and Motohama's pants. They both covered their crotch as they felt naked under the woman's gaze. Wow, Aika blinked in slight surprise. I didn't expect the pervert duo to have a length of 20 centimeters with a girth of 4 centimeters. I must say I'm impressed. Hey, she's using your technique against us. Mitsuda shouted at Motohama with a big blush on his face. So, this is how women feel when I look at them in detail. Motohama adjusted his glasses with a small blush. I think I'm beginning to understand why I was always getting beaten up. And the pervert duo's friend Issei was taken by surprise to hear that comment. You could use a couple of inches from your best friends. Don't go around spreading that stuff around like it's nothing. Issei pointed at her while covering his crotch with his other hand. Aika adjusted her glasses, studying his entire body in detail. Still, that's not your real forte. Hearing this, the 3 men not only managed to look at her curiously. Even though you wear such loose clothing, I can see very easily that you have a better physique than the prince of the academy." The woman fixed her gaze with a dangerous little glint in her eyes. "You're definitely much hotter than Kiba." Finally, Aiko bowed her shoulders and turned away. "It's a shame you're too embarrassed to show what you've got in store." "What's wrong with him?" Mitsuda wondered, giving her a dirty look. "I don't know, but class is about to start." Motohama adjusted his glasses with a perverted grin on his face. "I hear the new teacher is extremely pretty." "New teacher?" Issei sat down on his bench, turning to hear an explanation from Mitsuda. The bald-haired man was about to answer her, but a huge blush along with a small drop of blood on his nose rendered him speechless. "Quiet." Issei widened his eyes in shock. That voice. The protagonist quickly turned around, watching in utter amazement as Tiamat stood in front of her students. A small smile appeared on the dragoness's face, which seemed to be directed solely at Issei. "My name is Tiamat Freeze, and I will be your new chemistry teacher." Tiamat looked at all of her students with the typical serious expression on her face. "Does anyone have a question?" "Wait a second." Issei couldn't help but widen his eyes again. "The teacher who will be living in my house from today onwards is..." Mitsuda raised his hand. "I heard that you're an exchange teacher. So, are you staying at the academy residences or somewhere else?" "I'm living at Issei's house." The dragoness replied simply. All eyes fell on Issei, making the protagonist quite nervous. "Issei, you damn." Mitsuda began to emanate fire from his eyes. "Quiet." Tiamat's cold stare made Mitsuda cringe in less than a second. "I'm sorry," he stated, with a rather pale face. To begin the class, Tiamat fixed her gaze on Issei and pointed at him with the ruler. "How do, Issei?" The young man quickly stood upright after hearing his name. "What happens when CO2 goes into a solid state?" Issei blinked in slight surprise at the question. "When carbon dioxide enters a solid state, it turns to ice, teacher." "That is correct." Tiamat smiled at his. "But it's not just ice, it's dry ice. It differs from normal ice because it leaves no moisture residue since it is composed of a gaseous component." Tiamat walked over and gave a small tap with her ruler to a huge insulated box. "That's exactly what we'll be working with today. Taking advantage of the fact that today is very cold, each of you will take a small part of the ice and make a sculpture. I brought the materials you will need." Tiamat fixed her gaze on all her students with great seriousness. "Is that clear?" "Yes." They all answered quickly. Line jump. Everyone had already grabbed their gloves and different tools to work with the ice. As expected, the art did not go well with all the students. The only one who had not started was Issei. For some reason, his mind was completely blank. "What's wrong, Issei?" Tiamat perched next to him, looking at him intently. "I can't think of anything," the protagonist replied, rubbing his hair in despair. "I'm not asking you to craft contemporary art," Tiamat explained with a small smile. "Just think of something you like." Tiamat continued on her way, not noticing Issei staring at her for a few seconds. Issei tightly closed her eyes and began to think. Something I like, something I like. A lot of images came to his head from the many erotic movies he watches together with his friends. He also imagined Mitsuda and Motohama as they were his best friends and he really liked them. In that way, hundreds of other memories passed quickly through his head. They went on and on passing until... Suddenly, he frowned slightly as he saw long light blue hair in his thoughts. Then, it was beautiful eyes of the same color, along with a radiant smile from his mistress. Finally, he remembered how he looked while training, with that sweat sticking to her body. A small blush came to his face as he continued to remember his moments with her with a smile. Without a doubt, he liked her a lot. "Wow, Issei!" Mitsuda's shout brought Issei out of his thoughts. "That's a perfect portrait." "Huh?" Issei lowered his gaze, seeing that an ice figure of Tiamat training was in front of him. Quickly, everyone surrounded him to look at the perfectly crafted ice figure in utter amazement. "Look, even his clothing is crafted to perfection. It's mind-blowing." "What's all the fuss?" Tiamat quickly stepped forward and made everyone sit in their respective seats. She was visibly startled when she saw her figure. "Is it me?" The dragoness gently cupped her hands, looking at her carefully. "Every detail is perfect. Honestly, I'm impressed." Tiamat gave him a small smile that denoted her cute little fangs. "What did you base it on?" "Well," Issei rubbed his hair with a smile. "You told me to think of something I liked." Tiamat blinked in surprise, unable to stop a slight blush from appearing on her face at the response. Line jump. I'm not going to babysit, Azazel. Penemue would deliver him a mean look as she crossed her legs on the couch. Come on, it's not a babysitting job. Azazel placed a tray with 3 drinks on the table. Besides, Azazel grabbed a glass, delivering a sly look to the woman. This boy is very special. Maybe he's the apprentice you've been looking for these past 1,000 years. Penemue grabbed a glass, fixing her gaze on Azazel's face with great seriousness. I wouldn't be so sure. The beautiful woman took the drink delicately, but in a surprisingly quick manner. But I think I'll give it a try. I like the sound of that. Azazel chuckled. But try not to kill him in the process, or we'd be in a lot of trouble. The doorbell rang, causing a huge grin to break out on Azazel's face. He quickly got up from his seat and looked towards the entrance. Come in, it's open. Excuse me, Issei opened the door, bowing his head as a gesture of greeting. Azazel narrowed his eyes with a strange look on his face. Close the door. Issei half turned to close the door, only to hear a strange sound. His eyes grew wide as feathers blacker than night shot out in several directions. The protagonist didn't hesitate for a second and instantly turned around, his eyes widening in shock at what he was seeing. As you know, my name is Azazel. Azazel spread his numerous pairs of wings with a smile, as did Penemue, who still continued to sit. I am the leader of the fallen angels. And this is Penemue, my secretary, a cadre. As you know, my name is Azazel. The cadre spread his numerous pairs of wings with a smile, as did Penemue, who still continued to sit. I am the leader of the fallen angels. And this is Penemue, my secretary, a cadre. Issei was speechless. He didn't know how to respond to what he was witnessing. But it was more than obvious that he was intimidated. The protagonist could do nothing but take a step back, grabbing the doorknob, at the same time materializing his gauntlet. Easy, brat. Azazel tried to calm him down, putting his hands in his pockets. We have no intention of hurting you. Why is the leader of the fallen angels here? Issei questioned him, indicating that he still hadn't calmed down one bit. Who do you think sent the White Dragon Emperor to save you? Hearing this, Issei couldn't help but blink in surprise. I'm sorry, I didn't realize earlier what Kakabiel was up to, otherwise I would have stopped it from the start. The leader of the fallen apologized, taking a cup to offer him. I know you still don't trust us. But don't you think we would have killed you by now, if that's what we were after? Azazel narrowed his eyes with a very sly look. After all, you know well the power a cadre possesses. Issei thought, looking at the cup with great seriousness. Let's hear it. We lose nothing. The dragon declared earnestly, sensing no hostility from Penemue or Azazel. After a second, Issei finally grabbed the glass. I hear you. A big smile appeared on Azazel's face after hearing his response. Line jump. Serges invited you here? Issei looked at him in astonishment. Why would the president's brother call him? His thoughts tried to find an answer that did not appear. That's right. Azazel nodded, leaning back in the front armchair next to Penemue. At first, I didn't see the interest in taking him up on his offer. But, when he told me you were here, the idea of coming became irresistible to me. Me? Issei pointed out with a raised eyebrow. Azazel is a sacred gear specialist. He even has something of an obsession with them. Penemue explained, finishing her drink. He's fascinated by their workings, and that's why he couldn't turn down such an offer when he heard that one of the 13 Longinus were here. Longinus? Thought Issei. I remember hearing that name before. His thoughts were quickly abandoned when Issei came back at what Penemue mentioned to him. Wait, you two are sacred gears specialists? I never said I was. Penemue corrected him, looking at him with her stoic expression. But yes. Being your secretary, your jobs always go through me? Though I shouldn't always have to. She concluded, giving Azazel an evil glare, which was ignored outright by the leader of the fallen. Penemue abandoned his disapproving look, fixing his gaze on Issei with some curiosity. Why do you ask? Issei couldn't help but turn serious after the question. There will be a time when your body will no longer be able to improve and you will become stagnant. When that time comes, you will have to focus on the secrets of sacred gear to keep advancing, and only then will you manage to become stronger. That time is still a long way off, but ideally, at one instance in your career, you should train both fields at the same time, so that you can exploit your potential more quickly. Drake's words came back to his mind. That's all the same. Azazel clarified, causing the two to look at him. I guess what you really want to know is the other reason I came here. Azazel stood up from the couch, positioning his hand on his chin. Oh, am I wrong? Issei answered him with his very attentive gaze, searching for an answer. For starters, Serziches doesn't know that we were seeing each other for all these days, though I don't think that really matters to him, either, the fallen angel stated, looking away. What really matters is that his sister has no idea that I'm here. And what does the president have to do with this? Issei asked, raising an eyebrow. Everything. Azazel fixed his gaze on Issei, causing the protagonist to be surprised at the answer. Apparently, he wants to prepare Rias and his Aikido for the upcoming raiding game. But he had already committed to helping another family, that's why he sought me out. You'll train us? Issei widened his eyes as he found the answer. Azazel bowed his shoulders with a smile. I must say that Kakabiel made things a lot easier having torn Kuo Academy apart, because they can focus on training for a month and a half without any worries. Issei lowered his gaze, starting to pull all the threads together. That's why they didn't fix the building instantly, thought the protagonist aloud. You can figure things out pretty quickly when you put your mind to it, huh? Azazel commented with some amusement as Issei gave him a dirty look after his words. Well, Azazel rose from his seat. That's all for today. Huh? Issei did nothing but blink in slight surprise. Already? I called you here a day before the meeting to find out if you had any questions about Vali, but I see you don't. Azazel stated simply, causing Issei to become a bit serious. I've run into him before. I guess there's nothing I want to know about him, replied the young man, receiving a curious look from the fallen angel. Line jump. Mr. and Mrs. Hayadu were watching in mild surprise as Tiamat had been engaging Issei in a rather friendly conversation throughout dinner, something I missed them terribly. Thank you for the meal. The protagonist exclaimed, getting up from the table along with his now teacher. They both went to the second floor, causing the parents to look at each other. I never would have guessed that the teacher was the same young lady who visited Issei the other day. The mother commented. That's true. Father replied. But I'm glad it's her, because this way we won't have any trouble with Issei. You know what kind of trouble I mean. Mrs. Hayadu fixed her gaze on her husband. Hey, don't you think? Of course not. The man laughed. This is our son we're talking about. Do you seriously think he could have any kind of intimate relationship with a woman of that caliber? The father finished his drink, giving a sigh of satisfaction. She must have hundreds of worthwhile suitors. You know, businessmen, engineers, technicians, computer scientists, military men. The man waved his hand, indicating that the list went on and on. People who already have their lives figured out. Not a 17-year-old brat who has serious social problems, especially with the opposite gender. Omitting the fact that he's underage, of course. The father concluded, giving his point of view. Mrs. Hayadu just smiled at what her husband mentioned. She thought exactly the same as he did. Neither of them thought about what was going on in Issei's room at the moment. Tiamat caught Issei's cheeks with both of her hands. I don't like that at all. The dragoness stated with a very worried look on her face. You're not going to see any trouble. Issei sketched a silly grin at how Tiamat was taking such good care of him. We were talking it over with Drake, and they don't seem like dangerous subjects. Besides, they could have hurt me a lot sooner if they wanted to. Tiamat fixed her gaze on Issei's face, showing him all the internal conflict she had right now. Huh? Issei couldn't help but be surprised when Tiamat positioned her forehead against Issei's affectionately. Take care, Tiamat's worried tone intensified. Take good care of yourself, please. Tiamat parted her face slightly, denoting how her beautiful pure light blue eyes shone with great concern. If you're so worried, you can watch the trainings with your own eyes. Issei smiled at her, causing Tiamat to glare at him. That way, you won't be so worried. I'll take your word for it. The dragoness replied quickly, sketching a small smile that denoted her cute little fangs. Issei grabbed the dragoness's hand that was still on her cheek, chuckling lightly. I think you should start trusting others a little more. I know what they did to your kind, but everyone deserves a second chance, don't you think? Issei couldn't help but widen her eyes when Tiamat squeezed her cheeks even harder. Do you really think they're good people? The dragoness asked with great seriousness. Yes. Of course. Replied the protagonist with complete naturalness and assurance. Ah, my eyes, they are very good people. That's what your eyes see. Issei blinked in astonishment as Tiamat's eyes shone brightly. But are your eyes capable of distinguishing reality? Tiamat broke away from him, sitting down on the bed. Don't you think you should give them even a chance? Issei asked, rubbing his cheek nervously. I'll only give someone a chance if I think they really deserve it. Tiamat fixed her gaze on Issei, giving him a small smile. You, for example. Issei could only smile at her last words, remembering how their relationship had started with her wanting to kill him, and in fact, almost did. Besides, Tiamat couldn't help but lower her gaze with a hint of pain, causing Issei to flinch. It's not just that I can't trust them. Because I was completely blinded by anger back then, I let many classmates and friends who really cared about me die. Finally, the only one left alive was Tannen, and I haven't even visited him yet. Make new acquaintances. Tiamat couldn't help but widen her eyes at the protagonist's words. You know, you can make some friends at the academy. Take advantage of the fact that you're starting over now. I'll support you in everything you need. Tiamat could only clasp her hands together with some nervousness. But I'm not good with that kind of thing. Issei laughed, causing Tiamat to look at him with a small blush of embarrassment on her face. What's so funny? Issei leaned against the door, crossing his arms with a big toothy grin. Are you kidding me? Tiamat couldn't help but blink in confusion. What? Issei's face grew serious from one second to the next. Tiamat, you are a wonderful woman. After hearing her words, the dragoness could do nothing but lower her head so Issei wouldn't see her big blush. I'm sure all people would be as happy as I am to have you so close. Tiamat's hands tightened for a second. What's more, I'm sure you could find a love you so desire. Tiamat's hands clenched even tighter after his words, though this time it wasn't because it felt so good, but quite the opposite. As beautiful as you are, you could select a man who would truly love you, and I don't want another man. Tiamat's outburst made Issei blink in great surprise. I had already made up my mind. I don't want to be in a romantic relationship again. She concluded, handing him a smile. That's right. The only man who had any chance with her was Issei. She didn't want any other man other than Issei. She only wanted Issei. And would you like to start a love relationship? Tiamat returned the question, making the protagonist surprised. Would you die for me? At that moment, Issei felt like a complete idiot to have said all those things to Tiamat without considering her feelings. Especially, being that dragons feel 10 times more than humans. If he feels sadness, he feels it 10 times more. And as a drake bearer, those characteristics became part of his body. So, with Tiamat's question, he now knew exactly what she had been feeling right now. Well, Tiamat raised an eyebrow, waiting for the answer. Issei's mind began to grow fuzzy. Tiamat was the first thing that crossed her mind, sketching that huge cute smile she saw on her face for the first time. When they first met. When he decided to stay with her. You're incredibly idiotic, boring and desperate. Someone who really sucks. Do you really think any woman would be interested in you? I pity you. Rainer's words coupled with that memory, making Issei remember his misery. Tiamat did nothing but wonder at what she was seeing. It didn't take her a second to feel very guilty. Huh? Issei widened his eyes as tears streamed from his face without his consent, starting to wipe them away as quickly as possible so Tiamat wouldn't see them, but it was too late. His face quickly twisted into a very damaged expression, letting himself be carried away by what his heart was feeling. Those last words of Rainer's had been the ones that sentenced him completely, and he didn't need to be reminded of something so sad. Tiamat stood up and came to him in an instant. Issei couldn't help but widen his eyes as he felt his dragoness's lips press lovingly to his forehead. His sadness was quickly transformed into a great fascination for what Tiamat was doing, and his eyes reflected it very clearly. After a few seconds, Tiamat finally stopped kissing his forehead, lowering her gaze to look at him intently. I didn't want to make you remember something so sad. Tiamat's gaze softened greatly. Can you forgive me? Issei could only smile at her words. Of course I can. The protagonist positioned his face between her breasts, feeling absolute comfort. Tiamat wiped away the last tears that streamed from her face with her hand, making Issei smile even wider. We'd better each go to sleep. Tomorrow will be a very tiring day, don't you think? Unable to speak between her breasts, Issei just nodded, causing his dragoness to position her hand on top of his hair, stroking it lovingly. Line jump. Issei had been lying down for a while now, his eyes wide open, indicating that he couldn't sleep at all. Issei couldn't help but frown as he felt a strange pressure in his chest. A pressure that never left since the talk with Tiamat, though the dragoness managed to calm him down a bit in those moments. Drake, are you still awake? Issei called out to his partner, causing a droopy look to decorate his face. "I'm here," Drake stated earnestly, knowing what his friend was feeling. Issei put his hand to his chest, causing his gaze to turn sad. "Can you tell me what's happening to me?" he asked, his voice sounding rather droopy, as if he was suffering from a major depression. "You need to hold back those bad thoughts," partner the dragon stated with slight concern. "You're going through a trauma. But, having your emotions so intensified, having to deal with one trauma, it's like having to deal with 10 traumas at the same time. Star. I knew that all along." Drake couldn't help but be surprised at his response. "What I want to know is why this pain has intensified so much lately, being that I only think about Tiamat." Issei squeezed his chest tightly, feeling tears about to come. "She hasn't done anything wrong to me. In fact, quite the opposite. She's the best, she's wonderful, she's someone beautiful." The first tears began to well up in the protagonist's eyes. "Then why?" Issei's broken voice made Drake feel pity for its bearer. "Why is it that every time I think of all the beautiful moments I was with her, this pain intensifies?" Issei positioned his hand over his eyes so as not to see himself in such a pitiful state. "That's an answer you must find on your own, Issei. Star." The fact that Drake had called him by his name let Issei know he was very serious, so he clenched his fist tightly. "I'll find that answer," Issei replied, his tone of voice much more recovered. Drake just sighed internally, unable to help but worry for his partner. "I thought it might end this way," Drake thought seriously. "At first I was afraid Tiamat would become obsessed with him. But, now I just feel sorry for both of them." Line jump. Wake up, please." The alarm clock blared throughout Issei's room, causing the protagonist to give a small yawn. If you don't wake up I'll kiss you." Issei couldn't help but be surprised when a hand with a very creamy and refined skin rose up between the sheets, turning off the alarm clock with her hand. The protagonist pulled the sheets back a bit, causing Tiamat's light blue hair to glare easily, spreading all over the bed, something that was becoming a habit by now. At what point? Issei couldn't help but wonder, though he downplayed it when Tiamat hugged him tightly. At the same time a small pleased smile appeared on her face as she leaned him tightly against her chest. She turned off the alarm clock in her sleep? Issei thought, fixing the dragoness's tousled hair to see that her eyes were closed, releasing a cute image of inner peace. Finally, Issei stepped out of bed with great care, making sure not to wake the beautiful woman. A small smile appeared on the protagonist's face as he finished tucking her in and handed her a small pillow, as the dragoness instantly embraced him and turned around, her smile intensifying a bit more. "This is the first time I've seen her smile when she sleeps," Issei thought, looking at her with great attention as he put on his clothes. "I wonder what she's dreaming." Issei gave her one last glance before leaving, then closing her door with great silence. Tiamat again shifted on the bed, only to strengthen her embrace on the small cushion even more. Her cheeks slowly tinged in a pinkish hue, while the smile seemed to intensify even more. To finish, she uttered a single word with breathtaking tenderness and affection. "Issei." Line jump. "Where are the others?" Issei looked in several directions, seeing that only he and Rias were outside the old academy building. "Kiba is having certain problems, while the others are helping Zenovia control her demonic corruption," Rias replied completely matter-of-factly, ignoring the fact that Issei was looking at her with wide eyes. "Zenovia became a demon?" Issei asked in complete disbelief. "Correct," Rias answered again as if it was completely natural. "She asked me when we met yesterday," she clarified, looking at her nails carefully. "But she always said that demonic corruption disgusted her." Issei raised his gaze a little hesitantly. "That's true. When we met, she had mentioned that demonic corruption did disappear because of meeting you. You know, because of the generation that came after the Great War, and that whole thing," the Redeed remarked as if it was nothing, causing Issei to look at her with wide eyes. Suddenly, a somewhat distrustful and disapproving look graced Issei's face. "You lied to her." "What?" Rias finally abandoned that casual tone and stopped staring at the perfection of her nails to look him in the face. "I didn't lie to her. She never asked me in the first place." "But, she did believe it." Issei narrowed his eyes with great suspicion. "At the very least, you could have told her before you acted." "Why do you care so much?" Rias folded his arms, unable to help but raise an eyebrow. "You should be happy that your mistress has a strong new knight in her ranks." A small smile broke out on Ria's face. "Besides, you needn't worry." Akeno, Asia, and Kaneko will make sure she gets the internal corruption under control. Issei folded his arms, lowering his gaze. I see your point. The protagonist recalled Asia's drastic change after becoming a demon. But they'll never be the same, he whispered under his breath, feeling bad for Zenovia. Rias just looked at him in confusion, as he hadn't heard her last words. Oh, for. Kiba walked out of the old building, with 2 large pillows on his butt, as he walked in an awkward manner. That caused the awkward moment between Issei and Rias to break completely, as the blonde took all of the protagonist's attention. Issei couldn't help but look at Rias with a raised eyebrow, as he pointed at the blonde. What happened to him? It was punishment for disobeying my orders. Rias replied with a small innocent smile. The punishment was to slap him on the butt with the bonus of using magical power. Also, he is forbidden to be healed by Asia for 3 days. Issei couldn't help but look at Kiba with wide eyes, then start giggling like an idiot while pointing at the pillows on his butt. Issei, please don't be so cruel, Kiba declared, leaning against the wall with much difficulty, while a nervous smile decorated his face. Ha 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 ha. Issei clutched his stomach tightly, unable to stop pointing it out. Even being a Prince Charming didn't save you from this one. Issei exclaimed, starting to cry from laughter. President, how many slaps was it? He asked, wiping away his tears, unable to stop laughing. It was about 1,000 in total. The Redeed replied with complete confidence and innocence. Ha 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 ha, wait, 1,000, Issei shouted, her eyes looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. Don't you think you exaggerated a little? That way, I make sure no one gets sidetracked and everyone fulfills their duties. Rias replied, with some seriousness in her words. I guess you're right. Issei rubbed his hair, glaring at a strange look. Still, that's too much. Especially if we take into account the reason why Kiba left the president. In fact, I think I would have done the same thing. He thought, feeling a little sorry for the blonde. Hey, they all looked to the front, watching as a guy unknown to everyone appeared. To everyone, with the exception of Issei. Hello? Rias couldn't help but comment with some uncertainty as he saw the man who appeared to be a bit older than his brother. I hope you're prepared for what's coming, brats. Azazel's gaze sharpened, causing Kiba and Rias to look at him with some distrust. Who are you? Rias asked, stepping forward, giving him a menacing, piercing stare. Noticing this, a somewhat Machiavellian grin appeared on Azazel's face, causing a suffocating aura of a black color to emanate from his body. Your look doesn't scare me, brat. Rias reacted instinctively as he took a step back with his eyes wide open, while Kiba materialized his sword instantly. The other members of the Sakito came out of the old building, also prepared for battle. Still, everyone was perplexed when the guy burst into frantic laughter, only to have his extremely powerful aura disappear. No doubt your reaction was as funny as I expected. Azazel narrowed his eyes with a half-smile on his face. How about inviting me in? After all, I am a guest of Mao himself. He commented, teasing a bit with his last 2 words. Line jump. I don't accept it. Rias slammed her hands down hard on her legs, giving Azazel a dirty look. My brothers should have enough time to train us. She concluded, watching as Azazel had usurped her seat. If you don't believe me, you can call him. Azazel commented to her, fiddling with the pencils. He's very busy, training the other heiresses group. Rias blinked in great surprise at what he mentioned. You mean Sona? Well. Azazel rose from his seat, opting for a bored look. If it bothers you that much to have a fallen angel supervising your training, I guess I'll be on my way. Azazel took several steps until he was about to leave. A sly smile graced his face as he grabbed the doorknob. I wonder how much the Sidri family will be strengthened by the training of Mel himself. I'd be very happy to see it with my own eyes. He commented, causing Ria's eyes to twitch. Wait. Rias jumped up from her seat with a leap. Azazel turned his face away, smirking a small smirk. Do you have something to say to me, you proud brat? Rias shivered slightly at his words, but didn't let him tease her. Show us, please. A huge grin broke out on Azazel's face after her words. Line jump. Shall we train in hell? Issei had his face glued to the window of the subway train, trying to make out something of the place, but due to the great speed, it was impossible to appreciate anything. What better place to train than a place where they can feel at home? Azazel asked, leaning back in his seat very calmly. And a mysterious smile appeared on the fallen man's face. Here's the first stop. Everyone couldn't help but look at him with a raised eyebrow, as they were on the outskirts of the main city, according to them. What? Rias was the first to ask, only to get a huge surprise when a magic circle engulfed almost everyone in it. Ah! They all shouted out of fright, disappearing from the place. What? Issei quickly turned around, seeing that everyone had disappeared, except Azazel. Well, Issei. Azazel fixed his gaze on the protagonist, giving him a small smile. To be honest with you, I would have loved to supervise your training. But I think it would be best for you to train with someone stronger and more skilled than me, as well as focusing solely on your training. A magic circle appeared at Azazel's feet, giving a small military salute before disappearing. Good luck with them too. See you soon. What the hell? Issei watched with a pouty face as Azazel had left him alone, being that he had no idea when or how to get off. Wait, he said there were two. A look full of intrigue covered Issei's face. Who are those two? It didn't take long for Issei's question to get an answer, as the door connecting to the other carriage opened, causing the protagonist to widen his eyes in utter amazement. You, Issei commented, fixing his gaze on the hooded woman who had a height of 2 meters. We meet again, child. Penemue said, fixing her gaze on her potential student with her typical stoic expression. Line jump. I have already started the training. I decided to have Rias focus on her control over the power of destruction. While Akeno, let's say I tried to force her to awaken her true power, making her have no repulsion in using her falling power. Kiba is learning to control his balance breaker with Zenovia, making them both help each other. Asia is in charge of healing wounded animals all the time, to improve her effectiveness and speed in healing in the midst of battle. Azazel commented to Surziches, seeing that the supreme demon seemed to be waiting for someone else. Regarding Issei, I left him in the hands of Tannen and Penemue. They are heading to the dragon territory at the moment, so he will be separated from the others for the time being. With Tannen? How did you go about convincing him? The supreme demon asked with great intrigue. After all, he doesn't allow anyone to enter his territory because of what happened 1,000 years ago. I only had to tell him that Issei was the bearer of Drake. Azazel replied simply. Remember that the two of them were close friends in the past, and he must surely be happy to see someone who at least has a little hint of dragon in him. I see Surziches rested both hands on his face, looking at him with great seriousness. During training, won't Issei be able to visit Rias or vice versa? I would prefer that he not come in contact with his companions for a while. Azazel explained seriously. Don't take this the wrong way, but I think hanging out with them would only distract him from his goal. And believe me, he'll need as much concentration as possible to deal with the training. Mind you, this is Penemue we're talking about. He concluded, narrowing his eyes even more seriously. That's right, Surziches closed his eyes, giving an inward sigh. I was planning on getting Rias and Issei closed during this month and a half, but I didn't count that Azazel would have a plan like that style. He thought with some annoyance. Well, whatever. If he can become much stronger than I thought, this will end up benefiting us. The Rias thing can wait. He concluded, fixing his gaze on the window of his room. Well, I'd better get going. Azazel rose from his seat, giving her a small smile. I'll be taken for a bum if I don't supervise your training for more than 8 hours. Surziches just nodded with a smile. Line jump. The wind whipped strongly through Issei's hair, as a full focus was made to all around, seeing a seemingly endless grove of trees, plus a huge completely deserted mountain behind him. Where am I? Issei had a pouty face at what he was witnessing. He hadn't expected his lodging to be in such a complicated place. It certainly brought back some very pleasant memories with a certain dragoness. His goofy expression quickly disappeared as Penemue took a step forward, unsheathing her sword, which was a deep black color. She removed the hood of her huge black robe, fixing her gaze on Issei. Before I train you, I want to see if you're really what I'm looking for. Penemue fixed her piercing crimson-red eyes on Issei, causing the protagonist to unconsciously take a step back. What you looking for? Issei asked her, raising both eyebrows. Wait a minute, why are we going to fight? Issei quickly waved his hands in defense, seeing that Penemue seemed to be too serious, despite it being simple training. Her look said so. If you force me to say that one of your attacks could do even a little damage to me, you approve? Penemue narrowed her eyes, clenching her sword tightly. Otherwise, you fail. An attack that would hurt you? Issei raised an eyebrow. Are you out of your mind? Penemue positioned a hand on her waist, then raised an eyebrow. Does that mean you can't even give me a scratch? What? Issei's disengaged look changed completely, frowning slightly. An almost indistinguishable smile appeared on Penemue's face, seeing that the protagonist had easily fallen for his provocation. I'm sorry, but I can't allow anyone to call me weak, Issei declared, causing his gauntlet to materialize. In turn, a proud smile appeared on Drake's face after his comment. Penemue reaffirmed his grip on his sword, narrowing his eyes slightly. That's the answer I was waiting for. One of the fallen's legs came forward, and her other hand locked onto the metal part of the sword, taking a samurai stance that intimidated Issei a bit. Her long hair, as black as the darkness itself along with its purple highlights, began to wave in time with the wind, giving her a rather radiant and magnificent look to the woman, if you omitted the fact that she seemed to want to kill you. So let's begin. Issei quickly became nervous as he watched Penemue point her sword at him. Wait a minute. How much damage should I do to you in order to pass? Oh, how do you measure damage? Issei gestured with his hands as fast as he could, though the fallen didn't seem to be listening to him. The protagonist did nothing but grit his teeth as Penemue disappeared from his sight, feeling a great wind at his back. Penemue appeared behind him at an impressive speed. Focus, she commanded, directing a strong thrust towards Issei's chest, making it clear that she didn't care about hurting him badly. Just before the sword made contact with Issei's skin, a great crimson glow surrounded the entire sight. It could be seen as the figure of the protagonist spun around on itself at an incredible speed, kicking it in the chin and sending it flying. Penemue spun in the air, landing on her feet. A small line of destruction was generated in its wake, indicating that the attack had been stronger than it first appeared. Penemue raised her gaze, fixing it on Issei as she narrowed her eyes. This child, she watched him closely, watching as a suit of armor protected him. The protagonist dematerialized his helmet, cracking a small smile as he opted for a battle stance with one hand to the front. Penemue slowly stood upright, unable to take her eyes off him. The wind ruffled Issei's hair gracefully. I won't let you off that easy, the young man declared, unable to help but smile a little wider at her. Penemue raised her sword at his words, only to take a great leap past him. Issei could barely keep up with her, but still had time to react. Penemue landed behind him, wielding her sword with all her might to cut him in half. The woman couldn't help but widen her eyes a little as Issei stopped the attack in its tracks with both hands, grabbing the sword from both sides. A great blizzard was generated in the place, at the same time that Issei turned his face to look at her, without that smile disappearing from his face. Penemue's stoic face finally curved into a small smile. Impressive, child. You can call me Issei, declared the protagonist with a grin. His smile quickly disappeared, using his two hands to break Penemue's sword stance, causing the fall to kneel on the ground. Issei didn't waste a second, giving him a hard downward kick on top of her shoulder, creating a crater at his feet. Issei didn't stop for a second, trying to give her other kicks and punches that Penemue dodged and blocked them all with her sword. In the last kick, the fall blocked it with her katana, using the inertia of the blow to get ejected backwards. The protagonist watched with great seriousness as Penemue spun through the air, landing back on his feet with great grace. Issei, Penemue said his name, closing her eyes deeply as she rubbed her bruised shoulder a little. Very well, the woman stated, fixing her gaze on the protagonist. You can call me Penemue. Issei fixed his gaze intently on the woman's bruised shoulder. I'm sure I hit her with all my might, but I didn't even hurt her one bit, he thought very seriously. Still, Issei was undeterred by what she witnessed and quickly lashed out at her with a low kick, attempting to do a sweep. Penemue made a small jump and dodged the attack very easily. Hoping to leave her no chance to counterattack, Issei quickly followed her with a jump, trying to give her another kick. Issei couldn't help but widen her eyes as Penemue twisted her back backwards, generating a perfect angle for Issei's foot to embed inside, barely grazing her abdomen. They both landed back on the ground, and despite what he witnessed, Issei didn't want to be impressed by the woman, so he took a small leap, attempting to kick her hard in the head, which Penemue dodged, twisting her face backwards, barely receiving a small graze on her chin. What are those moves? Issei said to himself in clear disbelief, gritting his teeth a bit at what he witnessed. Anyway, Issei's attack wasn't over, as when he finished doing a 360-degree turn in the air from the inertia of his attack, he quickly attempted to give it a downward kick, exactly the same as the previous one. Although this time, Penemue dodged it with great ease, taking a small jump backwards. Issei's foot sank deep into the ground, raising huge debris on the spot. The protagonist could only look at her with great impression at her agile and calculating movements. The same attack doesn't work twice on me, Penemue declared, looking at him with her typical stoic expression. Issei could only grit his teeth at her words. He quickly wanted to lunge at her with a strong punch. Just at that moment, Issei felt everything slow down as he witnessed Penemue position her sword with great precision behind her arm, at the same time taking a small step backwards to step aside. Penemue managed to deflect the attack with her sword, demonstrating incredible precision, and then hit Issei's legs with a big kick that made him fall on all fours. Penemue raised her sword as high as possible, fixing his gaze intently on the young man. "It's over." Issei could do nothing but widen his eyes in horror at those words. Penemue turned her katana around to hit him with the blunt end, with the intention of knocking him unconscious. The sword began to descend at an enormous speed, making it impossible for Issei to respond in time. "Hold on." Drake's voice made the sword stop just an inch away from Issei's head. Penemue blinked in great intrigue as she heard the voice that detached the gauntlet. "He's not using his full power yet," Drake exclaimed, drawing the cadre's attention even more. He didn't just catch her attention, though. "What?" Issei asked, sitting down on the grass, then fixing his gaze on the gauntlet with great curiosity. "You still haven't used your emotions to reach 100% of your current power," the dragon explained with great seriousness. "Emotions?" Issei asked him, not quite agreeing with the idea. "Do you remember how it ended last time? I almost got killed for just a measly raise." The protagonist gave his point, making the dragon sigh. "It was a failure of mine, okay?" Drake found it, causing the cadre to look between the two of them with both eyebrows raised. Drake cleared his throat, indicating that he had had enough of wasting his time in stupid arguments. "This sacred gear works not only with hard work. One of its secrets is that it links the bearer's emotions with power. But I was wrong to think that you'd be just like everyone else." "Oh, what do you mean?" the protagonist asked, standing up in great confusion. He took a couple of steps back, making Penemue no longer able to hear their conversation, though she clearly looked curious at the subject. "My bearers have always reached their limit using negative emotions. But I think you're different. The last fight made that quite clear to me," the dragon clarified with great seriousness. "So, what do you propose?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Use good memories to release your current limit. I believe that if you use positive emotions, you will awaken your full current potential," the dragon stated in a rather confident and assured tone. "Good memories." Issei rubbed his hair, trying to remember something. "Remember all the time you spent together with Tiamat? Like you did that time with that ice job. Star," the dragon commented with some grace in his words, causing a huge blush to shoot across Issei's face. "With my teacher," the protagonist shouted, causing Penemue to be able to hear him. "It's not going to work. I mean, I've had some good times, but..." "Shut up and do it already," shouted Drake, not feeling like listening to such internal love conflicts in the middle of a fight. Yeah," Issei replied quickly, closing his eyes deeply as he clenched both his fists tightly. Penemue watched him patiently as a word mentioned by him hovered in her head. "So had a teacher before me?" she thought, looking at him with a bit of intrigue reflected in her beautiful crimson-red eyes. "I don't think this will work," Issei whispered under his breath, clenching his fists even tighter as the memories he spent together with Tiamat began to speed up his heart. What made his heart race were her beautiful deep blue eyes, along with her beautiful smile and cute fangs. Also, he remembered that little blissful time they spent in the snow together with their other dragon friends, and as if it was a big flash, the memories of that night in their room after the fight against Kakabiel also came back to his mind. How natural and free they both felt playing with each other. Especially her, that much he could tell because of her smile. She wasn't one to smile like that very often, but she always showed him a lot of affection when she had those kinds of intimacies with him. Yes. She was great. Undoubtedly cool. Boost. Penemue couldn't help but blink in slight surprise as a small blizzard rose up around Issei. Boost. A small blush crept onto his face as he continued to reminisce about his times with her. Boost. Why. Issei's eyes glowed a deep crimson red, causing a huge blizzard of power to completely surround him. Boost. 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 Penemue quickly took cover and widened her eyes slightly at what she was witnessing. The surge of power was astounding. Boost. 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 Issei staggered to the side with a look of complete astonishment on his face after feeling his power multiply. His armor glowed brightly with a thin crimson aura, indicating that the power he radiated was no joke. As Issei looked down at his hands in utter amazement, Penemue narrowed her eyes with great seriousness and positioned her katana in front, ready to defend herself. Taking her blows is no longer an option, Cadre thought carefully. So Issei clenched her fists tightly with a smile. This is my limit right now. He raised his gaze, getting into a fighting stance to lunge at Penemue. Now that I look at it very closely, your combat stance is also very refined, the fallen thought, then stared him straight in the face. I can see why you gave Kakabiel trouble. Her serious words, without a touch of emotion, achieved their goal of coming as a compliment to Issei's ears, so he couldn't help but smile at her. Thank you, he replied with a toothy smile on his face, though it suddenly changed to a defiant grin. But I won't be more benevolent just for a few words, he exclaimed with great confidence, running at a great speed towards her, which shattered the ground from his quick and strong start. He's much faster, Penemue thought. Her face denoted great calmness, even though Issei's fist was about to smash into her cheek. Just a millisecond before Issei's fist impacted against her face, Penemue practically disappeared and appeared only a couple of centimeters further back than she was before, causing the punch to pass right in front of her face. This time, Issei was not surprised by her speed. In fact, he had already thought that the woman would dodge it so easily. The Brown quickly continued with his plan and tried to hit her with his leg, which Penemue dodged with a great leap without any problem. At that moment, Issei quickly appeared in front of him and tried to give him a punch that the cadre dodged by moving her body to the side. At that moment, Penemue tried to counterattack with her sword, but Issei managed to dodge the attack by the skin of her teeth, receiving a small tear in the side of his armor, in the part of his abdomen. Seeing that her blow had no effect, Penemue quickly crossed her katana in front of her to block Issei's next punch. Of course, she never thought Issei was waiting for that moment. The protagonist's eyes widened in overdrive, adjusting the trajectory of his punch just in time, causing the punch to impact at an upward angle, instead of hitting her head-on. Penemue couldn't help but blink in slight surprise as the immense force of the blow broke through her defenses, and she raised both of her hands helplessly into the air, being completely exposed. Now, thought Issei, clenching both his fists tightly. A massive barrage of punches landed directly in Penemue's face with a frenzy and absolute speed, being impossible for anyone Issei had faced so far to dodge. The punches were coming with such speed that they were barely visible even to him. Still, something surprising happened. In some inexplicable way, Penemue's face moved even faster than his punches, dodging the dozens of blows going for her face with just the movement of her neck and head. The precision and speed was such that Issei could not notice until it was too late. Out of nowhere, Penemue swung her katana down again, causing Issei's fists to clash hard against the metal. Issei didn't even have time to respond, as in less than a second the woman had already swung her sword with an exceptional movement of her hand, plunging it deep into the side of Issei's abdomen. At that moment, everything went slow for Issei as he watched how the sword was piercing through his body. But how? Thought the young man with his eyes widening in complete shock. Time returned to normal, causing them both to descend from the sky and land on the ground, though it was visibly seen who landed better. While Penemue landed with the grace of a cat, Issei landed on his feet by a miracle, staggering as he grasped the wound that ran through his body with both hands. His gaze was downcast and completely obscured, so it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. Penemue narrowed her eyes slightly, then abandoned her attack stance as she watched Issei's body tremble. It's only natural that he has no pain tolerance whatsoever. He barely had 2 real confrontations, if I can consider the fight against Razor as a real one, she thought seriously, then began to slowly approach, ready to finish the fight. She approached patiently until she was in front of Issei. Penemue aimed her sword at him, twirling it with her hand to drive the point into his other side of his abdomen, convinced that this magnitude of pain would give her the victory, after Issei fell down in a faint. Penemue tried to pierce him with her lunge, being dodged as Issei's body moved to the side. The woman couldn't help but blink with some confusion at what she witnessed. Thinking it had just been a coincidence, she again settled back, trying to pierce him again on another side. The attack failed again, so quickly her attacks became more frantic and faster, being all dodged by the protagonist. Fed up with the situation, she tried to lunge him in the center of his abdomen. What the? Penemue blinked in complete surprise as her long silky hair fluttered behind a huge blizzard that rose up around them due to Issei having parried the sword with both of his hands like the first time. The protagonist looked up with a big defiant smile while a trickle of blood dripped from his mouth. That expression only made Penemue even more surprised, so she couldn't react when Issei used the grip he had on her sword to throw it away. As was now customary, Penemue spun expertly in the air and landed on her feet very gracefully, not taking long to fix her gaze on Issei. Her eyebrows furrowed again in surprise. How can he move like that? She's only supposed to have had 2 official confrontations. After thinking about that, Issei's previous word came back to her mind. Who the hell was her previous master? She thought with great intrigue and amazement. You're stronger than Kakabio, Issei exclaimed, not taking even a second to run towards her, generating a tiny line of destruction along the way. The cadre was again taken aback, as Issei's speed had barely slowed down a tiny speck from its entirety, being that he was somewhat damaged. Obviously, it also helped that Penemue was making sure not to damage even one internal organ. Penemue blocked the punch with her sword, then took a small leap to dodge a kick and lean her upper half of her body back to avoid another punch. She quickly spun the sword in her hand, then stepped forward and tried to cut him in his midsection. The fall could not help but grit his teeth a little when he saw that Issei made his whole body backwards thanks to his knees, and yet he did not lose his balance and was able to rejoin the second, trying to punch him. Penemue moved his sword at an impressive speed, blocking the attack and taking a small jump backwards to dodge another punch that was going for his face. Penemue tried to cut him again instantly, being surprised again when Issei gave a small jump backwards, falling to the ground, to then propel herself with her hands, giving him a strong kick in the center of the sword that created a small shockwave. Penemue was thrown back several meters, but still did not seem to be affected by the blow. As soon as Issei's foot touched the ground again, the chestnut rushed at Penemue with an astonishing momentum that shattered the ground. The fall didn't even have time to land from the previous blow, as he had to cross his sword and create a magic circle. Issei's punch impacted so hard against the magic circle that it violently blew both of their hair off, generating a small shockwave along with a loud bang. It didn't take long for the magic barrier to shatter into 1,000 pieces, but Issei's attack had already ceased by then. With the intention of not giving her a break, the chestnut-haired man rushed at her again, trying to strike different blows to her face with his fists, which Penemue was able to block with her sword. Seeing a small opening between their frantic attacks, Penemue quickly blocked an attack and readjusted the direction of the sword with her hand, making a cross cut. Issei was able to dodge the attack by bending his body like last time, showing off not his flexibility but his balance and grip strength. The protagonist again rejoined and began to attack again with his quick punches, all being deflected by the fall with the help of his sword. Cadre watched as her adversary's arms passed inches from her face with an expressionless gaze, though her eyes seemed to reflect some interest in his abilities. After standing like that for a few seconds, Issei delivered a heavy blow to the sword that sent her a few feet back. Penemue widened his eyes slightly as his always perfect posture wavered, due to the fact that he had rested his foot on a large crack that had been generated by the combat. The protagonist passed this by unnoticed, lashing out at her practically instantly. Despite her imbalance, Issei couldn't help but be impressed at how the woman managed to block all the attacks that were going for her face, though she clearly looked quite restrained. How annoying! Penemue thought with some astonishment, seeing that Issei was too frantic when it came to fighting and gave no breaks. Seeing that he was about to fall, Penemue knelt down in one swift movement, causing the chestnut to slightly grit his teeth at the unexpected situation. Penemue quickly responded with a sweep of his sword, being dodged by Issei with a leap. Even so, the chestnut was left with his back to the cadre, so Penemue's eyes flashed dangerously at this. The fallen one swiftly rushed towards him, saying the following words. Dance of the 11 bloody hilt. 11 lunges were fired at a rather surprising speed against Issei in the area of his torso. Even so, the brown-haired man was able to dodge each of the attacks, swinging his body from side to side with great agility, despite being on his back. Even so, in the last lunge, Issei ended up leaning backwards again thanks to his knees. But it seemed to be that Penemue was waiting for this moment. Now, thought La Cadre, turning in less than a second her katana to hit him in his head with the blunt part, knowing that it was impossible for him to dodge. Just as he was about to give him the coup de grace, Penemue's eyes blinked with slight surprise as the chestnut dropped his body, resting both hands on the ground so that he then propelled himself with the help of the ground to give him a strong kick that Penemue managed to cover with his sword. Issei quickly deployed his dragon wings and went to attack him immediately, without giving him any rest. Penemue tried to recompose herself in mid-air, but it was useless, as the numerous kicks of the chestnut came quickly. Even so, the cadre was able to deflect all the kicks with her sword. The contest went on like that for a few seconds, both being dragged along with great speed by the inertia of the blows, and the fact that they were not touching the ground only made it easier. Finally, Penemue blinked in complete surprise when Issei caught her sword between her 2 feet in her last deflection, making her completely helpless for a short second. And that second was more than enough. "Ah!" Issei shouted with great energy. Penemue could only watch as the chestnut's knee slowly approached until he got a big knee to his chin that generated a big blizzard on the spot, along with a small crater at his feet, even though they weren't touching the ground. Penemue flew off at a great speed, starting to roll on the ground, being the first time in the whole fight that he didn't land on his feet. The cadre raised her gaze slightly from the ground, looking at Issei with her typical stoic expression. A huge smile appeared on Issei's face at this. "I finally got to hurt you," he exclaimed, clenching his fist tightly. Hearing this, Penemue couldn't help but smile a little. "But what do you say?" the fallen one asked, slowly getting up from the ground, leaving his sword stuck in the ground. This was barely the warm-up he finished, doing a couple of stretches on his neck. "What?" Issei couldn't help but shout with his eyes wide open. Did that mean that punch had done almost nothing to her? Cadre finally stopped stretching, opening her eyes again. Issei couldn't help but take a step back when he saw the look in her eyes. A look that indicated trouble. "First, let me take this off." Penemue began to slowly open her robe. "It's too annoying to move," she clarified, pulling the zipper down to the level of her breasts, then yanked it off. Issei couldn't help but blush and cover her face with one hand. Why you're seriously planning to fight in those clothes?" Issei asked, having a small gap between his fingers to look at the woman, as if he was a child looking at something he shouldn't. "Of course," Penemue replied completely matter-of-factly, while holding the robe in one hand. Issei couldn't help but stare at how those tight bandages completely surrounded her breasts. Yes, they were completely surrounded and left nothing to be seen. But they were so fucking tight they looked like they were about to burst. And despite being so tight, her breasts very easily covered a good portion of her upper torso area. Despite being so tightly packed, it was easily seen how all around those 2 huge mountains were perfectly balanced and supported, indicating that her breasts possessed an exquisite shape despite their ridiculous size. First, Issei had met a woman who had such a juicy and unmatched ass, being Tiamat herself. Now, she was in front of the largest breasts, and if that wasn't enough, they were also extremely perfect. Not only for their large size, but also for their firmness. Definitely, her breasts were what stood out the most about her figure. Even so, all her bare abdomen, and her ass being covered with a small black garment, did not leave much to be seen. And, despite having such large breasts, she could assure that her bottom was not that far behind, although it clearly couldn't compare to Tiamat's cute ass. Issei quickly shook his head. Is this for real? She couldn't help but wonder internally. Why do 2 extremely perfect women have to show up right after making that promise? The brown man thought, cursing the now deceased god for preparing such challenges against his word for him. Now, if I can just move much better. Penemue closed her eyes deeply, doing a little stretch on her back, making Issei's eyes almost pop out of their sockets at her movements, as she looked very sensual. Finally, Penemue took the sword and gave a small sigh. "I don't need this anymore," she commented as if it was nothing, throwing the robe far behind her. At that precise moment, that was when Issei completely forgot about the incredibly endowed body in front of her. Why? Because of that robe. A huge explosion sounded behind Penemue, where the rogue had fallen, causing the chestnut to widen his eyes in complete shock. "WWH what?" the chestnut shouted at the top of his lungs after seeing the robe nearly shatter half of a small hill completely. Small violet lightning bolts began to completely surround Penemue as he clenched his sword tightly. The sword began to slowly tinge with a purple aura until it finally covered her completely. Seeing this, Issei couldn't help but stare at it with great attention. Is he imbuing magic power into his sword? The brown-haired man thought, then shook his head emphatically. "Calm down, Issei. Surely that must have been some trick." The chestnut quickly got into an attack stance, beginning to sweat. She's a cadre. Though they are very powerful, I've recently tested the power of one, and there's no way they can move at such speed if they're wearing such heavy clothing as that, the chestnut concluded, swallowing hard in an attempt to calm himself down. Issei quickly lashed out at him, intending to punch him hard in the face. Penemue not only held back the punch very easily, but also drove Issei backwards with his sword, demonstrating a much greater strength than a few moments ago. Even so, the Brown did not give up and lashed out again without wasting a second. Their kicks clashed loudly, only to have their fist and sword collide at the same time, Issei's arm falling underneath the sword. The Brown quickly pushed the sword upwards, creating an opening similar to the previous one. When he saw that his chest was free, he tried to hit him with his other fist, but was surprised by a cut that barely grazed his cheek, producing a long, deep horizontal cut along his entire cheek, causing him to scream loudly in pain and be ejected backwards. The wound began to bleed slowly, causing Issei to shudder in pain as he sat on the ground. "Why does it cause so much pain?" he asked aloud, resting his hand on his cut cheek, then looking at the blood, slightly surprised when a small purple lightning bolt came out of the blood. Light energy, combined with the lightning attribute. Penemue shook his sword hard, removing the remnants of blood. Light energy is highly corrosive to demons. Now, add to it that lightning transports such energy at a higher speed within the organism, plus it produces a degree of pain 10 times stronger than a normal light attack. For an added bonus, the sword allows the magic to do much more damage, making a simple cut to the chest can be deadly. Although, some prefer to say that the sword can do much more damage thanks to the magic. Well, anyway, both answers are valid, he concluded, showing off his knowledge. Hearing this, Issei could only smile and clenched his fist tightly. All in all, the spears of light remain as mere toys in front of that sword, he commented, standing up while wiping the blood off his cheek. Penemue couldn't help but sketch a small smile after what he heard. And now the cadre rested her sword on her shoulder. "What do you plan to do?" Hearing this, Issei's serious face turned into a smile. "This," the chestnut shouted loudly. A second later, magic circles appeared and completely surrounded Penemue, leaving her with no way out. At the same time, Issei quickly ran towards her to make sure she didn't escape without a scratch. Seeing that she was surrounded, Penemue closed her eyes serenely. "I placed them the last time it attacked me." "That's a brilliant idea." The cadre opened her eyes slightly, denoting a dangerous gleam in them. Nevertheless, just as Issei and the magic circles were about to attack her, Penemue lowered the sword from her shoulder, glowing intensely purple. After that, the following words could be heard coming from her beautiful lips. "Lightning shell." After saying those words, Penemue began to spin on itself at a speed never seen before, causing a strange purple light to surround it completely. The magic circle attacks were deflected as soon as they came in contact with the spinning sword, while Issei impacted heavily against the energy, causing it to start spinning on itself at a great speed. The entire armor began to be damaged rapidly until it was completely shattered. Then, Issei's clothes slowly ripped off, giving them several not very deep cuts all around his body. Finally, Issei was ejected backwards, falling shatteringly to the ground, apparently unconscious. Surrounding your enemy with magic circles is of no use if said opponent is almost 6 times stronger than you. Cadre exclaimed, dematerializing the sword and turning around. "I guess I was expecting too much," she commented, slowly starting to walk away. Silence ensued for a few seconds, only being interrupted by Penemue's footsteps. Until, finally, "Where are you going?" The deep red glow in voice forced Penemue to look sideways at him, seeing that he had materialized the armor again. "I didn't want to use this because I was worried about you," the chestnut declared, slowly getting up with clear difficulty. "But now, I'm not afraid of hurting you too much, knowing how strong you are." The chestnut exclaimed with a somewhat dangerous smile on his face, as a moderately large ball of energy began to form in his hand, taking a large portion of his magical reserves with it. The ball completely covered his hand, being the size of a soccer. The amount of magic used is pathetic, Penemue thought, turning around to look at it with great attention. "But, that color and shape reminds me of something," he concluded, pointing his sword towards Issei. The brown-haired man drew his hand back energetically. "Don't blame me if you end up really hurt with this," he shouted, running full speed against her. Penemue watched with great calm as he approached her, again surrounding himself with that purple aura and lightning. "Come on, DDRAIG," Issei shouted, extending his hand towards the woman's sword. "Dragon shot." Hearing those two words, Penemue quickly widened her eyes wide and grabbed Issei's arm tightly to deflect the attack skyward in an instant, causing Issei to widen her eyes in complete shock at not even being able to witness her move. In fact, he swore he hadn't even moved a few moments ago. Penemue dragged Issei by the arm and aside swiftly and drew him to the ground, pouncing on top of him while holding the tip of his katana inches from his face. Finally, a huge deafening explosion shook the entire place, causing the crimson-red color to blind everyone in the forest. After several seconds, the screeching sound of the explosion finally died away, at the same time as the blinding crimson light began to give way. The first thing Issei could see was Penemue's beautiful face inches away from his, as he held his sword inches away from his face. The two shared a piercing gaze for a short second, until finally the cadre spoke. "That could have really hurt me," she commented, standing up and offering her hand to Issei. Oh, Issei took the hand in slight surprise at the gesture. "Thanks, I guess." Issei rubbed her hair with a nervous smile, then widened her eyes to the max. "Wait, does that mean?" A small smile broke out on Penemue's face. "Congratulations, Issei." Fall positioned a hand on the chestnut's head. "You passed." Thank you for watching part 7 of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and liking the video. I hope to see you in the next video.